Hey everyone, can you hear me okay? Good, good, good. I'm Ellen. I'm wearing my good Levi's today, my victory after the pandemic so that they still fit. And feel free in the Q&A portion to ask Chip about the jeans that he's wearing because they're pretty special, pretty trick. We're here to talk about leadership, specifically how the person in the top spot of very, very big companies can and should play a powerful role in what leadership students like to call aligning business to broader social purpose. But for the rest of us, it's perhaps using their enormous resources and power and connections to save a broken, inequitable, and really divided world. So, Chip, this is the part where I say nice things about you, and you just have to relax and talk about and listen to it. Chip, as CEO, has been unusually vocal on some of the most pressing social issues of the day, even considering that you're the CEO of an unusually progressive brand. And I've been lucky enough, as a person who covers race and inclusive leadership, to follow you for a number of years now. Luckily for me, you write a lot and you write well. You convene your peers in really interesting and powerful ways. And alongside him, we have become more fluent in the language of stakeholderism and watched him become increasingly focused on addressing what he calls structural racism in bold ways, and that's a term that's going to be meaningful in just a minute. All the while turning around a beloved but sputtering brand and taking it straight into a successful IPO, which sounds like a tremendous amount of work. But for me as a journalist, Chip, you really are a small but growing part of a number of CEOs who have embraced radical collaboration and radical transparency, and not just in data, but in the way that you think and the way that you think out loud, and particularly in the service of moral leadership and inclusive leadership. So I've been appreciated being going along on this journey with you, and thank you for inviting me to get out of the basement and back to Aspen.
Well, thank you, Ellen, for being here, and it's a delight to be here with everyone.
So I'm going to ask you to set the stage and frame the moment that we're in now. Is it a real moment? Is it a reckoning? And what's at stake if CEOs don't step up to this moment? But I would be remiss if I didn't ask how you and the company's doing and your employees. You know, retail is a beast on a sunny day, but after pandemic, it must be really challenging. How's everyone doing?
Yeah, it's been, first of all, it's a delight to be here with all of you and have the opportunity to share. It's been a tough 15, 16 months. The pandemic has really had a big impact on retail, unless you were a lucky retailer who got to stay open during the pandemic. A year ago, almost to the day, we had our second quarter analyst call, and we reported that our revenues in the second quarter a year ago, which, or it was our, March, April, May, our revenues were down 67%. Yeah. We were last year about a $6 billion company. We expected to be about $6 billion. You know, there's a little bit of seasonality, but that's about $1.5 billion a quarter. We did less than $500 million of revenue in that quarter. It was brutal. And even today, you know, we're all here without our masks on, and things feel like they're slowly starting to return to normal in many parts of the United States, but I have stores still closed in many parts of the world. We have factories that are closed in many parts of the world. You know, the pandemic is still real, and it's still out there and still having an impact. Having said all of that, when the lockdown happened, we immediately prioritized first our employees and keeping our employees, especially the frontline employees, safe. And then the second thing we said was, we're going to come out of this a stronger company than we went into it. And little did I know everything that we were going to experience over the next 15 months or so with not just the global health crisis, economic crisis, racial reckoning, social reckoning, the spotlight of the pandemic on all of the inequities in this country in particular, and having to deal with all of that. But we are emerging from this pandemic a much stronger company. We're more profitable. Our stock price today, amazingly, despite the fact that our business is still about $1 billion below what it was a year ago, our stock price hit an all-time high just a couple of weeks ago and is well above where it was before the pandemic started.
Well done.
And that's really the market reflecting the confidence in the Levi's brand emerging from this much stronger.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. I want to dig into your CEO journey and pick some really public nodes to dig into how you think about things. But we are George Floyd's murder plus 369 days. We're spending a lot of time talking about race and equity, and a lot of corporate leaders are particularly as well. Is this a real moment? Can we trust it?
This absolutely better be a real moment, because if we fail to take action, when I say we, I'm talking about leaders everywhere, anybody who has an opportunity to make a difference here. If we fail to take action on the structural racism that exists in this country and on the social inequities that exist in this country, which we've all seen through the course of this pandemic, it will be a missed opportunity, and we will continue to go backwards as a country. And so I do believe personally that this is a meaningful moment. I've said if you fail to act as a leader, you're complicit in structural racism. So as CEO of a big company, for me it was a reckoning as well. I had a storyline in my head that as a country we've made a lot of progress combating racism, and you could selectively point to maybe a couple of things as proof points to that. But the reality is, and it wasn't just George Floyd, it was the string of murders during the pandemic. So Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. For me, even the Cooper incident in Central Park demonstrated what white privilege is all about. And so for me, I had to deal with my own reckoning around white privilege. The second thing is we took a hard look internally at where we stood on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the company. And I have to say, and I've said it publicly before, it is my biggest failure as a CEO. We are not where we need to be, and that means that we're not the company we have the full potential to be. And so I've made it one of my top priorities that we are going to fix our diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's a cultural issue too, that we're going to address it. And we made a number of commitments, as well as transparently reported all of our diversity, equity, and inclusion data.
Well, I appreciate that transparency. And you're right, by the time you're no stranger to open letters. You communicate publicly, and we can walk through a couple of them, but you started out in 2016 with an open letter that you wrote on LinkedIn, very politely asking legal gun owners not to carry firearms into your stores. And we're going to lead to where you ended up on diversity and inclusion, because I'm convinced this was actually an interesting journey. I read the note on LinkedIn, and I read as many of the 5,018 comments as I could stand.
I didn't.
Well, it's a reporter's burden. Can you tell us what the genesis of that was, and what you learned from the backlash, and what you learned about listening to your employees?
Yeah, so the real short version of it is we have a company policy that prevents employees from bringing weapons into work. We have about 250 or 260 retail stores here in the United States, and in many states, customers can walk into the store with a weapon. And our store managers were concerned about that, because as a store manager, they're concerned about the safety in their store, and somebody walks in with a weapon, you don't know if they're a good guy or a bad guy or what their intent is. So I had heard about it from our store teams, and that this was becoming more and more of an issue. And then what really caused us to publish the letter was a weapon went off accidentally. So one of the gun owners in a changing room dropped his weapon, and it discharged. You can't make this shit up. I'm telling you, this is true. The guy shot himself in the foot and had to go to the hospital. And it is a true story, swear to God. I could tell you what store it was. It was in Georgia. And that's what prompted the letter. And really, if you think about it, it could have been one of your children, one of your grandchildren. It could have been one of my store staff. It could have been an innocent customer in the store there just to buy a pair of 501s. And fortunately, nobody was injured. So we went to school on the best practice, and several other retailers had published similar type letters, respectfully just requesting gun owners to leave their weapons locked in their car, to not bring their weapons into the store. And and we waded into this gun debate almost just out of the sheer intent of trying to keep our stores safe. I had death threats. We had unmarked police in front of our house. It was a trying couple of weeks.
And yet, 2 years later,
that wasn't enough.
the polite request to just leave your guns in the car was not enough. And I think Parkland clearly was part of the decision.
Yeah. So our target consumer are young kids, basically, right? So 18 to 30-year-olds is our target consumer. And we do a lot of research, and with that cohort, the two biggest issues on their mind here in the United States is climate change and gun violence. They all grew up doing lockdown drills. I have a daughter in school in San Francisco. They practice lockdown drills more than they practice earthquake drills. It's a reality. And unlike a lot of us who practiced duck and cover drills because the Soviets were about to drop nuclear bombs on the United States.
I remember those.
That never happened. So there were a string of mass killings in 17, 18, 19 that culminated, the straw that broke the camel's back for me was the Parkland shooting. And this time I went to our board of directors because we wanted to really weigh in on ending the gun violence epidemic in this country. And knowing how contentious that is, and really all we're about is ending gun violence epidemic. We're not about taking away weapons or ending repealing the Second Amendment. It's just about protecting our society. And this year alone, there have been almost 400 mass killings. Mass killing is defined as 6 or more people killed. 400 incidents already. We are on pace to have a record year, beating last year's record year. Mm-hmm. So we decided to weigh in. And the board actually, in the engagement with my board of directors, they made the program stronger. We went in saying we wanted to do a one-year program. We wanted to speak out on this, but more importantly, we wanted to put our money where our mouth is. So words is one thing, action is another. So anytime we take a stand on something, we're acting on it as well. And the board said, in for an inch, in for a mile. If you're going to do this, do it for at least 4 years and commit at least $1 million to it. So we funded a number of nonprofit organizations, largely led by youth who are committed to ending gun violence in this country. We're now 4 years in, and we're continuing. So we're going to keep going until we make a difference here.
Well, but where does the resolve come from? I think the first time you did the public letter, you had 4 other CEOs join you, and a year later, after your IPO, in the middle of, in between all the other things that you're doing, you had 100 people join you. What was that like? What were those conversations where more people felt comfortable coming on board?
Yeah, I like to talk, Levi Strauss has a long history, and this isn't really about me necessarily. It's really about the office of the CEO at Levi Strauss. There is a moral obligation to lead with courage and to want to make a difference in the world. We're a relatively small company. Like I said, we're $6 billion. Our market cap's about $10 billion. We punch way above our weight. But it's about being the tip of the spear, about not being afraid to be the first one to take a stand on something. So when we spoke out on ending gun violence, that first letter, when H.R. 8, the Gabby Giffords bill, was introduced to the House of Representatives, I think it was 2 years ago, it was me and 3 other CEOs. Ed Stack from Dick's Sporting Goods was the other notable one. 6 or 7 months later, when the similar bill was sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk and not going anywhere in the Senate, we did a similar letter and had 160 CEOs sign it. On the letter that went to the senators, we kept it live on the internet, and we had over 200 CEOs join. So clearly there's momentum, and there's a little bit of safety in numbers too for those CEOs that didn't want to be the tip of the spear.
That's true.
They can join in in the conversation.
So let's switch gears and talk about the work that you're doing internally. Like for so many CEOs and other executives that I speak to, the world had been operating at 211 degrees, George Floyd brought us to a boiling point. You have been unusually candid, as you typically are, about what that revelation was for you. You talked about reckoning with your own white privilege. Could you talk about how you began to understand what was happening in your own company and what you decided to do about it?
Yeah, so right after the George Floyd murder, we have employee resource groups, as many companies do, and we have a Black employee resource group, which is called Onyx, which has been a phenomenal organization. They've actually impacted our business in a positive way. We never used to do special product for Black History Month. They said we should do special product and collaborate with Black artists. So we've done that. So they've had real positive impact, not just culturally, but also from a business standpoint. So right after the George Floyd murder, I got together with some of the leaders of Onyx and just had a real candid conversation about what it was like to be Black in our company. And the truth of the matter is, while on a total US basis, we are a relatively diverse company, when you look at our headquarters and you exclude our retail stores and our distribution centers, we are way off of the mark. And then if you slice it by layers of management, starting with my executive team, we are nowhere close to where we need to be. And as I said earlier, that's one of my biggest failures, I think. And for me, a real reckoning, and I'm determined to fix it. It is now one of my top priorities. But listening to these Black leaders talk about how difficult it is to live in San Francisco, the microaggressions that they faced inside the company, the challenges that they have looking up the company hierarchy and not seeing someone like them, it was gut, I mean, I'm getting goosebumps. It was gut-wrenching for me. It was like I was like, this is our company. This is not who we are. And we have to address this. So I started engaging with them on what should we do about this? And that led to a number of concrete action steps, because to say you're complicit if you're not doing something is one thing, but to lay out a roadmap for here's what we're gonna do and committing to it publicly is another. So the first thing we committed to was publicly and very transparently sharing all of our diversity data in the US and committing to do that on an annual basis. It's not great today, as I said, and we slice it. You can look it up, it's online right now. We slice it by management. We exclude distribution centers and retail, so you have a real picture of corporate headquarters. And we're gonna do it every single year. And it better get better, or I might not see my 11th year in this job. And so we're really determined to make it better, and we've put real programs in place. We committed to doing a pay equity study, not just by gender, which we've been doing for several years, but also by ethnicity. We published the results of that in January. We committed to adding Black leader to our board of directors, which we've already done. We've added Elliot Rogers, not because he's Black, but because he's an awesome executive. He's the chief information officer at Ulta Beauty. He has a long history of supply chain, former military officer like myself. He went to West Point, I went to real school, but it's a joke. But we made that commitment. We also said every open position that we hire for, the slate has to be 50% diverse. And we're insisting on diversity in every interview panel that we do. We've significantly increased our university hiring from historically Black colleges and universities. So a number of these programs have gone into place. We've also added an awesome hire, our Chief Diversity Officer, Elizabeth Morrison, who is, really my partner to bring a lot of these programs to life, and she's amazing.
So if I had more time, I would ask you a million follow-ups on all of this. But I want to bring the work inside and outside together. I want to read from an astonishing op-ed that you published. You publish almost as much as I do, Chip. It's really incredible. After the police shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha. And you said, over the last couple of weeks, what I've really come to believe is that a number of the issues that we've stood up for, which would be guns and immigration and voting rights and all the that stuff, are in a way are all interconnected to racism, to structural racism in this country. And we say structural, not systemic, to remind everyone that these are man-made structures. To me, this is the moment where you're thinking out loud and pulling it all together and then gathering other leaders around you to think about this. Am I reading this correctly?
Totally. I've got a couple of really good thought partners internally, including Elizabeth, but we were talking about all these different vectors and how it disproportionately impacts Black and brown communities. Gun violence disproportionately impacts Black and brown communities. We've been very active in getting the vote out. We led this coalition, had over 1,000 CEOs commit to giving their employees time off to vote because we're one of the only democracies in the world where election day falls on a work day. And I might be able to get out for a couple of hours to vote, but a lot of others can't. And so we led a coalition around that. But voter suppression disproportionately affects Black and brown communities. And now these laws that are working their way around 47 different states, 300 some odd laws, are all about suppressing votes from Black and brown. I mean, it's racism, and it moves us backwards decades. So gun violence, voter rights, it is all man-made structures, and it is intended to prolong white privilege. I mean, I'm just saying it as I see it. And these are man-made structures. That's why I think the word systemic racism is wrong. Weather is systemic. It's natural. It's Mother Nature.
Yeah.
These are man-made structures.
So particularly for the cohort I spend a lot of time thinking about, which is the 500 largest company by revenue, they are filled in the C-suite and in the talent pipeline with majority culture people who have the privilege that you just described. How are you seeing that work evolve? Is it happening fast enough? And what do you see as the way forward for people to work together to begin to address some of the structural issues more effectively? Because if this is the moment, this is the moment.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, so we are where we are as a company, and I would encourage every CEO, if you haven't looked at your diversity data, you better do it right now, and slice it and dice it the way I suggested, by level, by pay grade, by function, by business unit. And the reality is we are where we are because we have man-made structures internally that have created the ceiling that has prevented people of color to rise in the ranks to positions of leadership, and we have to break that. So we're now going and really understanding what are the systems and structures that are getting in the way. That's why we're insisting when we do an interview panel that half of the panel must be people of color. And sometimes our chief diversity officer is one of the interviewers.
Right. No, I understand.
Because, it's for understanding. So, but we're not making progress nearly as fast as we need to. I'll say it that way. I think, it's going to take a little bit of time, and it is about culture change, but there has to be a commitment that starts with, this is a business imperative. We're not doing it because we need a better culture or because we've got to check the box on diversity. I fundamentally believe that the leaders of the company and people in the company need to reflect the consumers who are buying our product. And the Levi's brand is one of the most democratic brands in the world, one of the most iconic brands in the world.
That's
and
right.
We need to have representation of our consumer base at all levels of the company.
So I want to end on our philosopher king question. Are there new kinds of leaders emerging? You're describing somebody who has to think out loud, who has to think about stakeholders and constituents in a whole new way, maybe even rank the order in which they care about them. We're spending so much time talking about stakeholder capitalism and how that's going to be successful and what we're going to measure for success. Our boards, you're a board chair. Our boards or other senior executives looking differently at their talent pipeline, looking for somebody that has this kind of fluency, cultural fluency.
Yeah, I mean, the job of the CEO has gotten so much harder in the last couple of years, and I've always said CEOs have to manage the gray area. The problem is the gray area is expanded, exponentially because of all these social and societal issues that we now are dealing with. So I do think that leadership needs to evolve. And I mean, one of the great things about the pandemic is empathy really rose to the top as an important leadership skill. And all of a sudden I'm doing Zoom meetings in people's bedrooms or living rooms, or while their kids are running around and they're supposed to be Zooming to school. It really led to a different type of leadership. And so I do think we are going to see leaders either evolve their leadership skills or practices, or they won't be successful, and new leaders will emerge that have those characteristic traits.
All right, I got to let you go, Chip. I can talk to you all day. Final thoughts on the way forward?
Yeah, I guess I'll end where I started, which is I believe we are at a moment. And if we fail to capitalize on this moment in addressing some of the deepest issues that we have as a country, and if CEOs fail to capitalize on the moment in capitalizing on those issues internally as well, we've missed a big opportunity to make a big difference.
I appreciate you, and I appreciate you always taking my call. You met my cat on the last Zoom call, too, so that was a nice bonding moment, too. Chip Bergh, thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for braving the weather.